Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Chris, co producer and editor of The Last Architect of Eterra. In the last episode, I read the opening section of the prologue, and today I want to stay with that moment a little longer because that prologue is doing a lot more than introducing a world. It is introducing a wound. It is introducing a law. It is introducing a survival instinct that will shape Aelit for the next 10 years of her life. And it is doing all of that through one terrible night. The night she lost everything. The night her father told her to become nothing. The night the Wardens came. The night the tuning fork passed into her hands. So this episode is really about three things at once. It is about Aelit, it is about the Wardens, and it is about the tuning fork. But more than that, it is about the way those three things become fused together in one formative event. Because after that night, Aelit is never just a girl in hiding. She is a girl shaped by a command, a girl shaped by an erasure, a girl carrying an object that is much more than an object. And I think that is why the prologue matters so much. It is not just backstory. It is not there to explain the plot in a convenient way. It is there to define the emotional grammar of the whole novel. When I think about that scene, the line that always stays with me is not even the most spectacular image, though there are a lot of unforgettable images in those pages. It is this: become nothing, Ela, become dust in the cracks. That line contains almost everything. It contains love, it contains terror, it contains helplessness, it contains strategy, it contains the whole structure of Eterra in miniature. Because what kind of world teaches a child to survive by becoming nothing? What kind of world makes invisibility the first form of protection? What kind of world makes self-erasure feel more realistic than rescue? Eterra does. That is what those pages teach us. And that is why the prologue hits so hard. It understands that in some worlds, the first rule of survival is not fight, it is not speak, it is not run proudly into destiny, it is disappear, hide, flatten yourself, make the world forget to notice you. And that is exactly what Aelit learns. Before she learns how powerful she might become, she learns how to vanish. Before she learns what the tuning fork really is, she learns what attention costs. Before she learns anything about buried history, resonance, ancient systems, and the larger architecture of the world, she learns the raw emotional fact that survival in Eterra begins with concealment. That matters. Because if you want to understand Aelit, you have to understand that she is not a character who begins in confidence and loses it. She is not a character who begins in clarity and gains strength. She begins in terror, in compression, in fear of her own visibility. And that fear is not abstract. It is not mood. It is earned in the most violent possible way. She sees her father taken from her, but not in the ordinary tragic way fiction often handles parental loss. He is not simply killed, he is corrected. That is a much colder thing. That is a much more disturbing thing. And that brings me to the Wardens. I think the Wardens are one of the most effective presences in the whole opening of the book, because they are not scary in a loud way. They are not theatrical. They are not full of rage. They are not monsters in the usual sense. They are frightening because of their precision, their composure, their calm, their lack of drama. They do not arrive like chaos. They arrive like procedure. And that is almost always more frightening. They do not blow the door apart. The door forgets how to be a door. That is such a chilling image. Even matter itself seems to surrender in their presence. The world around them does not shatter, it gives up. And that tells you what kind of force they represent. Not brute destruction, not heat, not frenzy, something colder, something more final, something that hollows rather than crushes. That line from the prologue is so important to me. The presence of the overseer did not crush. It hollowed. That is the essence of the Wardens. They are not there to put on a show of strength. They are there to remove the living center from whatever stands in front of them. That is why the description of what they leave behind is so horrifying. They do not leave bodies. Bodies are merciful. Bodies can be mourned. Bodies can be buried. Bodies can be remembered. The wardens leave order, perfect order. That phrase is terrifying because it reveals the values of the world they serve. In Eterra, at least in the logic of the Inquisition and the larger system around it, the worst thing is not pain, it is irregularity. The worst thing is not death, it is anomaly. The worst thing is not cruelty, it is the persistence of something human, messy, unsmooth, unpredictable, alive. So the wardens do not just remove threat, they remove friction, they remove personality, they remove that ungovernable spark that makes a person more than function. And when Aelit sees what they do to her father, she is not just witnessing violence. She is witnessing a philosophy of perfect obedience, a philosophy in which usefulness is cleaner than humanity, a philosophy in which a corrected person is preferable to a living one. And that experience does not just frighten her, it teaches her. It teaches her that visibility can end with the loss of the self. It teaches her that power will not merely punish you, it will empty you. It will make you remain while taking away whatever made you yours. That is one of the reasons the scene with her father is so painful. He is still there. His body is still there. His shape remains. But what made him father is gone. The stubborn line of the jaw, the warmth in the eyes, the ungovernable life of him, gone. And then comes that devastating detail of him placing the wrench on the workbench with measured precision, perfectly parallel to the edge. That is one of those small moments that can break your heart more than a large dramatic gesture, because it shows you exactly what correction means in this world. Not just submission, not just defeat, perfect alignment. The human turned into function, the living turned into proper arrangement, the beloved turned into order. And for a child to witness that, for a child to understand, even without fully understanding, that this is what power does here, that leaves a mark deeper than language, which is why the command become thus matters so much. Her father is not offering her courage in the usual storybook sense. He is not saying stand tall. He is not saying fight for me. He is not saying remember who you are and the world will answer. He is saying survive at any cost. Even if survival means reducing yourself to almost nothing. Even if survival means becoming smaller than grief, smaller than rage, smaller than the instinct to respond. Do not look at them. Do not reach for the spark. Become dust. There is so much love in that and so much despair. It is a father trying to save his daughter with the only truth that seems available in the world they live in. He knows that resistance is almost impossible. He knows what the wardens are. He knows what Aelit's power could do if it spiraled out in panic. And he knows that if she is going to live, she has to make herself into something the system overlooks. So that sentence becomes the first law of her next decade. Not just a survival tip, a worldview, a behavioral code, a posture, a life. That is why when we meet Aelit later in the book, she is so convincing. She is not hiding because the plot needs mystery. She is hiding because hiding has become identity. That is what trauma does in this story. It does not merely wound, it instructs, it trains, it makes a method out of fear. And that is why I keep coming back to the prologue not as setup, but as formation. It forms Aelit. It forms the reader's understanding of Eterra. And it forms the symbolic logic of the tuning fork. Because the tuning fork enters Aelit's life at exactly the same moment as terror, inheritance, and command. It is not introduced as a neutral object. It is introduced as the thing placed in her hands at the edge of catastrophe, and that gives it an enormous emotional charge. The tuning fork is obviously important as an artifact. It clearly matters in terms of power, resonance, and the larger buried history of the world. But before it means any of those things in a grand mythic way, it means something intimate. It means her father's last act of protection. It means transfer. It means trust under impossible pressure. It means containment. It means, in a very real sense, the passing of a burden she did not ask for and cannot yet understand. And I love the way the prologue handles that transfer. The tuning fork does not simply glow like a fantasy relic and announce itself to the reader. It interacts with her body. It draws her magic into itself. The shrill ringing in her ears stops. The violent pressure leaves her blood and gathers inside the golden metal. That is not only a magical event, it is an emotional one. For the first time in the middle of absolute terror, something in her is answered, contained, held. There is a strange mercy in that, a strange recognition. The tuning fork seems to know what to do with the force she cannot yet live with on her own. And that makes it more than a tool. It becomes a bridge between child and father, between fear and power, between body and artifact, between the buried past and the person who is going to carry that past forward, whether she wants to or not. That is why I do not think of the tuning fork as just a cool fantasy object. It is too emotionally loaded for that. It is inheritance in metallic form. It is the moment of loss made portable. It is proof that something ancient and alive still exists under all the systems of control in Eterra. And it is also a question. What do you do when something powerful answers you before you are ready for it? What do you do when the thing that might save you is fused forever to the worst night of your life? That is Aelit's situation, and it is such a rich one, because from that point on, she cannot separate power from memory. She cannot separate resonance from terror. She cannot separate the artifact from the night her father was taken from her. Everything becomes entangled. The Wardens, the command to disappear, the tuning fork's warmth, the father's last instructions, the loss of self she witnesses in him, the unbearable pressure to remain unseen. All of it folds together, and that folding is exactly why the prologue has so much weight. Another thing I love about it is that it quietly introduces the scale of the story without ever abandoning the emotional center. You have this deeply intimate trauma scene, a child under a workbench, a father trying to buy her a few more seconds, a room becoming unreal under the pressure of the wardens. And within that, you also get hints of something much larger: quarantine, a living planet, a signal fire in the dark. The sense that the world Aelit thinks she lives in is only the surface layer of a far bigger truth. That is such smart construction, because it means the prologue is not only about pain, it is also about horizon. It is telling you very softly and very early that what is happening here matters beyond this workshop, that the forces moving around the Aelit are not only local or political, they are connected to older structures, older mysteries, older intentions buried under the systems of the present, and yet the scene never loses the human core. That is the balance I admire most. It keeps the scale, but it never abandons the child. It keeps the mythology, but it never lets mythology swallow grief. So by the time Aelit drops the tuning fork down the shaft, the moment lands on multiple levels at once. It is practical catastrophe, obviously. It is a child fumbling the impossible under impossible pressure. It is the loss of the one thing her father just placed in her hands. It is a terrible accident, but it is also symbolic. The artifact falls into the dark. The inheritance is buried. The answer vanishes into the machinery of the world, and Elite's whole next life is shaped by that disappearance. That is the birth of her hiding years. 10 years passed since that night, the prologue tells us, and those 10 years are defined by concealment, stolen identities, dead names, forgotten profiles, gray ration bricks, machine schedules, and the father's old jacket, with its trace of impossible softness and perfume, lingering like a ghost from a life that should not fit inside a place like Sector Zero. That is such a beautiful touch. Because even there, in the middle of all the rust and surveillance and industrial pressure, something tender survives. A scent, a trace, a remnant of softness that should have no business existing in a world so organized around harshness. It reminds us again that Eterra may be a world of suppression, but suppression is not the same as total victory. Something always survives. A scent, a memory, a fragment, a buried object, a living response waiting to answer. And that brings me back to why the prologue matters so much. It does not just tell us what happened, it tells us what kind of story this is. This is a story where the most dangerous powers are not always the loudest ones. This is a story where silence is not peace, but pressure. This is a story where order can be more terrifying than chaos. This is a story where inheritance arrives hand in hand with trauma. And this is a story where a child is taught to survive by becoming dust, only for that buried dust to carry within it the possibility of answer, of resonance, of return. That is why episode 4 had to stay with this material, because you cannot rush past a beginning like this. The Wardens are not just antagonists. They are the moral code of the world made visible. The tuning fork is not just a device. It is grief containment, inheritance, and buried power fused into one thing. And the night Aelit lost everything is not just the first tragedy in her story. It is the event that teaches her what it means to live in Eterra, how to hide, how to fear, how to endure, and eventually how to answer back. Next time, I want to stay with the tuning fork a little more closely, not just as an artifact, but as a language, as a form of containment, as a bridge between fear and power, and as one of the most emotionally charged objects in the whole book. I'm Chris. Thank you for listening.